Hi, it's Miss Deegan, and I'm going to walk you through Tuesday, September 15th's class, week 2, day 2. Today we're talking a lot about McDonald's, but before we do, a couple of administrative announcements. One, make sure when you're doing your writing entries, you're not doing too much. I see a lot of people writing whole paragraphs or more. That's not what I want. I just want a simple 3-sentence entry, and that will allow me to see where you are in your writing, which is exactly what I'm measuring at the moment. I'll show you an example of what I'm looking for. Okay, so here is an example of the kinds of sentence stems that I need at the moment. I will assign longer writing, but not yet. So I'm looking for my stem, in this case, a woman won $2.9 million from McDonald's, copied and pasted 3 times, and then you just finish the sentence. It's going to look and feel strange at first. I'm hoping it gets more and more comfortable. So I wrote this sentence with the conjunction because, and this sentence with the conjunction so, and this sentence with the conjunction but. Actually, this is a student's that I borrowed. So yeah, I don't need anything more than this. And when you go in to do today's, you'll notice the stem is the same as yesterday's. So you could even begin by copying and pasting that 3 times and knowing that you'll come back to it and finish those sentences. And we're doing the same sentences again because today I'm going to give you more information about this McDonald's case. I'm trying to complicate your thinking around what happened to this woman. So first, we just said hello, and we considered this concept of how a woman could sue McDonald's and make all sorts of money. It's crazy and even kind of dumb. Here are the facts of the case. Just a reminder. A woman in California spilled a cup of McDonald's coffee on herself. She sued McDonald's because the coffee was hot and burned her, and she won $2.9 million. We asked ourselves, though, what else would you need to know about the case? We often form opinions before we have evidence. Right now, we don't really have evidence. We just know one thing. What's the problem with that? Well, the problem is we don't really know how bad the burns were, and we don't know where she burned herself, and we don't know how she burned herself. We don't know if maybe the person who was helping her poured the coffee on her head. We don't know much. And before we form an opinion, we need to collect some of that evidence. So as a group, we asked ourselves, what else do we want to know about the case? Is there anything else we would want to know before making a decision if we were on that jury? We came up with some things we wanted. We want to know how bad were the burns, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd degree burns. We want to know how did she burn herself. We want to know where did she burn herself. And we want to know some things about McDonald's defense. And so, we spent class finding out that information. I read aloud from this website, and I'm going to read aloud now more details of the case. You can follow along on your screen. It's important to know that this is from the Attorneys for Consumer Protection in California, and so that they are biased. It's in their interest to defend consumers, just like it's in McDonald's interest to defend itself. So let's keep that in mind. The McDonald's hot coffee case. It is the case that gave rise to the attacks on frivolous lawsuits in the United States. Almost everyone seems to know about it, and there's a good chance everything you know about it is wrong. In 1992, 79-year-old Stella Liebeck bought a cup of takeout coffee at a McDonald's drive-thru in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and spilled it on her lap. She sued McDonald's, and a jury awarded her nearly $3 million in punitive damages for the burns she suffered. Typical reaction: isn't coffee supposed to be hot? And McDonald's didn't pour the coffee on her. She spilled it on herself. Besides, she was driving the car and wasn't paying attention. Now for the facts. Mrs. Liebeck was not driving when her coffee spilled, nor was the car she in moving. She was the passenger in a car that was stopped in the parking lot of the McDonald's where she bought the coffee. She had the cup between her knees. While removing to add cream and sugar, the cup tipped over and spilled the entire contents on her lap. The coffee was not just hot, but dangerously hot. McDonald's corporate policy was to serve it at a temperature that could cause serious burns in seconds. Mrs. Liebeck's injuries were far from frivolous. She was wearing sweatpants that absorbed the coffee and kept it against her skin. She suffered third-degree burns, the most serious kind, and required skin grafts on her inner thighs and elsewhere. Liebeck's case was far from an isolated event. McDonald's had received more than 700 previous reports of injury from its coffee, including reports of third-degree burns, and had paid settlements in some cases. Mrs. Liebeck offered to settle for the case for $20,000 to cover her medical expenses and lost income, but McDonald's never offered more than $800, and so the case went to trial. The jury found Mrs. Liebeck to be partially at fault for her injuries, reducing the compensation for her injuries accordingly. But the jury's punitive damages award made headlines. Upset by McDonald's unwillingness to correct a policy despite hundreds of people suffering injuries, they awarded Liebeck the equivalent of 2 days' worth of revenue from coffee sales for the restaurant chain. That wasn't the end of it, though. The original punitive damage award was ultimately reduced by more than 80% by the judge. And to avoid what likely would have been years of appeals, Mrs. Liebeck and McDonald's later reached a confidential settlement. Here is some of the information and evidence the jury heard during the trial. McDonald's operations manual required the franchise to hold its coffee at 180 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit. So remember, 212 Fahrenheit is boiling. This is not too far from boiling. Coffee at that temperature, if spilled, causes third-degree burns in 3 to 7 seconds. The chairman of the Department of Mechanical Engineering and Biomedical Engineering at UT testified that this risk of harm is unacceptable, as did a widely recognized expert on burns. McDonald's admitted it had known about the risk of serious burns from its scalding hot coffee for more than 10 years. The risk had repeatedly been brought to its attention through numerous other claims and suits. An expert witness for the company testified that the number of burns was insignificant compared to the billions of cups of coffee the company served each year. At least one juror told the Wall Street Journal she thought the company wasn't taking the injuries seriously. To the corporate restaurant giant, 700 injury cases caused by hot coffee seemed relatively rare compared to the millions of cups of coffee served. But, the juror noted, there was a person behind every number, and I don't think the corporation was attaching enough importance to that. McDonald's quality assurance manager testified that McDonald's coffee, at the temperature at which it was poured into styrofoam cups, was not fit for consumption because it would burn the mouth and throat. McDonald's admitted at trial that consumers were unaware of the extent of the risk of serious burns from spilled coffee. McDonald's admitted it did not warn customers of the nature and extent of this risk and could offer no explanation as to why it did not. In a story about the case, published shortly after the verdict was delivered in 1994, one of the jurors said over the course of the trial, he came to realize the case was about callous disregard for the safety of the people. Another juror said the facts were so overwhelmingly against the company. That's because those jurors were able to hear all the facts, including those presented by McDonald's, and see the extent of Mrs. Liebeck's injuries. So, it turns out there's quite a lot more to the story. And that helps that video in that article, there's a video linked in the agenda. I can't show it in this video because of copyright infringement, but it's about 5 minutes long, and it's a really nice and kind of humorous look at what happened from Adam Ruin. Adam Ruins Everything is the name of the guy who does this thing on College Humor. So I encourage you to look at that if you want to have even more information about what happened. My question then for your class is, has your thinking changed and how? You missed the breakout groups and discussion, but you can still do today's writing work. And that will reveal to me and to you how your thinking has changed. So you can go back to your document and you can find Tuesday. Today, in completing these stems with because, so, and but, reveal to me where your head is at now as you think about the facts of the case. And when you do that, you'll be all done with our classwork for Tuesday. Thanks a lot.